Is that better? That's a little better. Okay. But we're going to look, as always with my work here, is looking at history. How does all this line up with history? There is history and there is the Bible. And that can be a difficult go sometimes. So this is a 5-week course. We're doing this for 5 weeks. We've got to cram it in pretty fast. And I am Dr. Donald Kaasch, for those of you who don't know. When setting the biblical record against the historical record, there are the occasional parallels common to both that act like a true stake in the ground, a point upon which both line up together. It doesn't happen that often. Such points are few and far between. Blue line will always be biblical narrative. And then historical level narrative will always be green. But we can go and tighten in the historical. In this case, for this course, it's going to be Egyptian. In this case, it's the book of Kings we're going to look at for a second, just as for a stake in the ground. Shishak, the king of Egypt, marched against Jerusalem. All right? Historical, Egyptian history. Sheshonk, it's the same king. Sheshonk invaded Canaan and Jerusalem. All right? Same guy, same action, same city in both. All right? Historically, that takes place in 925 BCE. We have that because there's a huge depiction of Sheshonk conquering Canaan and Jerusalem down in Luxor on a big portal, a big door. All right? And so that correlates with 925 BCE in the Bible. Okay? In this case, in the book of Kings. It furthers itself. 2 Chronicles 12:5, I abandon you to Shishak. And that lines up with that 925 date. Exodus 1:8 through 11. Pharaoh said to his people, the sons of Israel are more in number than we. That's a big statement. There's more sons of Israel in Egypt, according to this statement, than Egyptians. So he appointed masters over them, the sons of Israel, and with hard labor they built for Pharaoh the cities of Pithom and Pi-Ramses. All right? So, sons of Israel built for Pharaoh the city of Pi-Ramses. Pi-Ramses. What's the name? Ramses. It's right there, clear as a bell, okay? So we go back to our lines. The sons of Israel built for Pi-Ramses. There is notable information, notable in this. It ticks off a few things. Who and what, right? From elsewhere, we're going to find when and where. Because we're getting pieces of information inside of the Bible, and then we have other people's pieces that correlate inside of history, and we can drive that stake in the ground. The biblical narrative, in this case Exodus 1:8 through 11, the sons of Israel built Pi-Ramses. Historical narrative, green, once again. Egyptian history, that's what we're working with in this course predominantly. Ramses II ordered Pi-Ramses built. Does that make sense? You don't have Amenhotep III ordering a city to be built for Ramses II, because Ramses II hasn't even been born yet. Okay, you can't, it has to be in the time of the pharaoh by which it's named. So we have a stake in the ground, 1240 BCE. And therefore we can correlate the sons of Israel built Pi-Ramses to 1240 BCE. It's not two events, it's the same event being mentioned. And we'll touch back on this one a little bit later, but I wanted you to understand the look of these kinds of timelines or points, stakes in the ground. The sons of Israel built Pi-Ramses. Who? Sons of Israel. What? Pi-Ramses. Ramses II ordered Pi-Ramses built. Who? Ramses II. What? Pi-Ramses. When? Well, from Egyptian history, we know when. 1240 BCE. 1240. What's missing? Where? Well, it's Pi-Ramses, isn't it? So where is Pi-Ramses? Where in the world is Pi-Ramses? We got this problem, but we don't really have much of a problem. Archaeology knows exactly where Pi-Ramses is, and the ruins are quite intact. Pi-Ramses was built on former cities of former pharaohs, and those were built on top of two cities. They were twin capital cities for the Hyksos, who had lived up in the Nile Delta several centuries earlier, all right? So don't we know this from history? Cities are built on top of cities that are built on top of cities, and in that part of the world, they're called tells. And archaeologically, they just keep digging trenches down and deeper and deeper and deeper, deeper through each previous city that were usually destroyed or burned or razed to the ground or something, but they are able to do this layering. This is modern archaeology. Not so modern. It's been going on for a long, long time. Better than 150 years. So we have this problem of where. Well, where Pi-Ramses is located has a pivotal impact upon the ability to accurately follow the storyline of Exodus, doesn't it? Think about it. If the sons of Israel are building as slaves for Pharaoh the city of Pi-Ramses, where Pi-Ramses is very, very important. It's very, very important. We go to Exodus. The narrative second book of Jewish Torah and of Christian Old Testament scripture, that's what Exodus is. It's a second book. Torah, the first 5 books of the Jewish Tanakh, usually called the law, but more accurately means instruction in Hebrew. Hal, is that correct? Torah doesn't mean the law, it means instruction. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, as we discussed a little bit earlier. The word itself was adopted into English from the Greek exodos. The prefix ex means out of, and hodos, the road or way, meaning the road out. The road out, or the way we know it as a mass departure. A lot of people. Do you remember the movie? It's a lot of people, right? He did get that right. It's a lot of people. Already we're in the mire of translation and tradition, which is counter to the actual names and meanings in Hebrew. Torah doesn't mean the law. It means instruction. It means instruction. And we can be behind before we've even started. This is the complexity of translation. Also the complexity of counting on movies to be the truth, right? If you go back to that movie, boy, you're going to be surprised. Good on you. Amy has never seen it. Well, you know, you're better for not having seen it for a lot of reasons. Charlton. Charlton Heston, yeah. Yeah. If you saw that Prince of Egypt, that's better though than that. I mean, this was overacting at its finest. Exodus, that's what we call it, right? We call it Exodus. And it really in Hebrew is Shemot. Shemot. Hal, what is Shemot? Names. Names. In Hebrew, it's not Exodus, it's Shemot. The Shemot means names in Hebrew. We're already off. It doesn't mean a mass departure. It doesn't mean anything close to that. It means Shemot. It means names. There are a lot of names in Shemot. A lot of them. In fact, everyone is named practically in it. If you're male, right? If you're male, you get a name. Remember that even in the New Testament, in Mark, Jesus's brothers get names, but his sisters don't. All right, it's the same thing. But before we begin, if you thought we've begun, we haven't quite yet. We need to set the stage for this epic. It's important to know where this takes place. It's important to have that, like a canvas before paint, We need to know where it all takes place. The geography is going to be incredibly telling for what takes place in what we call Exodus, and to be able to understand it. Okay, if blue is water, yellow-green is livable, okay? Yellow is really not good at all. So where in the world is this? See that peace sign at the end of that? It's not Dick Nixon. That's a little place, okay? Well, let's look a little closer. Pardon? Ah, you're getting there. You're getting there. So we're going to look at that little section that I outlined. There, it's a little closer, okay? All right. See where you're at? Mediterranean's up there. Red Sea, Nile. Let's get a little closer. Okay. There's the Med. Now it's the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. We're way north of the Red Sea. We're way north of it, okay? We keep moving up north. Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba, Nile and Delta, Mediterranean. Over there on the far side, can I do this? Can I do this? Wait, it's not going to do it on the light. Not on this one. Nope, doesn't do it with the screen. Over there, you see that body of water to the far right? What is that? Or is the Dead Sea? That's way south, isn't it? Right. So we're going to have to look at this a little closer. So that's Egypt over there. And we're way in the top, aren't we? We're way north. Way, way north. Let's pull this in a little bit more. Okay? Now, this is an aerial view. What do you think of that central area? Think that's hopping with trees? Bunnies? Grazing animals? No. That's called the wilderness of Shur, and it is awful up in there. It is bad lands, okay? So we have the Gulf of Suez, Gulf of Aqaba, and the Delta, that Nile Delta. So what does the Delta have to do with Exodus? What do you suppose the Delta has to do with Exodus? Who?
The Egyptians and the Israelites.
Okay. Lois is saying that's where everybody was. Don't steal my thunder so fast, all right? So the Delta has quite a lot to do with this story. It's pivotal to this story. Let's take a little wee look. That's the whole thing. That is the Red Sea, that long, long arm, and at the very top, the peace sign, is the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. But that long body of water that goes all the way down, on the one side, on the right, is what is modern Saudi Arabia, and to the left is Egypt, and then southern Egypt, going down into ancient Kaasch, or Ethiopia, and all of that down there. So if you want to go east or west, from here, what is the most likely passage on foot either direction? If you want to go east or west? Okay, so I've got some good answers already, because if you look at the geography of it, you have very little choice. If you want to go east or west, you got to go way up. So is it this? Are we counting that out? That bit of it there, which is like 100 miles of water? Something like that. So it's over 100 miles wide of water. Okay, so is it that? And if so, where along there? Where are you going to do that? Does that make sense to expect to be able to walk across that? Okay, well, it isn't. It's not that. So let's go a little bit higher and take a look at this up here. How about this little block right up there? How about that little bit up there, where both the Gulf of Suez and Gulf of Aqaba is, right? How about there? Well, it maybe isn't even as worse, because now you have more water you're going to have to go across. And they're not a hop, skip, and a jump either. Okay? So if we're going to look at what's reasonable, it's this little area here, isn't it? From the top of the Gulf of Suez up to the Mediterranean. Isn't that it, folks? I mean, if that's it, pardon? It's only 100 miles from the top of the Gulf of Suez to the Mediterranean. 100 miles. It's very narrow. And this is the most likely passage on foot, either direction. Wouldn't you agree? Supernatural aside, it simply is. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, if you're going to go from one side, east to west, back and forth, you're going to have to go up there. So we're looking real close up there, aren't we? That little area that I've outlined, that's this little passageway, and it was closely guarded by the Egyptians for this very reason. Up in Canaan, up along the eastern Mediterranean, it's a nightmare. You can't hardly live up there. The amount of people that can survive there are very limited in number, and if you exceed that, you got to leave, and people would want to come down into the green. Look at the delta. The delta has more available land to cultivate than the entirety of the Nile going south in Egypt. It's that important, the delta. In ancient Egyptian, it was called the Patfi. And it was called the Yam Suf in Hebrew. Had a name, the Yam Suf. We know it as the Suez Canal today. That's where it's built. And it makes sense because it's quite messy through there. It's not a desert so much through there, not through much of it. So why does Exodus begin in Egypt? Well, it begins in Egypt because in Exodus 1:1 it says so. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt. And there's a ton of names, but the sons of Israel who came to Egypt. That means something, doesn't it? Goes on, Exodus 1:7, the sons of Israel increased greatly so that Egypt was filled with them. Filled with them. So that means they've been breeding like wabbits for a long, long time, right? I didn't say it, Lois said that. Okay, and they are, according to this account in Exodus, they have exceeded the Egyptian population. That's what it says there. The sons of Israel came to Egypt, and Egypt is now filled with them. That's a big statement, isn't it? It's a huge statement. The sons of Israel are foreigners, aren't they? You have to come someplace. If you come to a place, you're not from that place, so you're foreigners. They're foreigners. It implies that these foreigners have a huge population throughout Egypt because they are, Lois, what? Breeding like wabbits. Like wabbits. So simply placing Exodus somewhere in Egypt is much too vague for the daunting task of understanding the text, isn't it? What? There's somewhere in Egypt? Where were they in the movie? Where were they in the movie? Somewhere in Egypt. Just somewhere in Egypt. And if you got to part the waters of the Red Sea, you better be south, shouldn't you? If you're going to get there, you have to be there, okay? So fortunately, Exodus tells us exactly where they were. Exactly where they were. Do you remember? We've already read it. 1:8-11. Pharaoh said to his people, the sons of Israel are more in number than we, so he appointed masters over them. And with hard labor, they built for the Pharaoh the cities of Pithom and Pi-Ramses. And we're focusing on Pi-Ramses in this case, and we know exactly where Pi-Ramses is, don't we? I'll show you. If a group of people are building the cities of Pithom and Pi-Ramses, it simply cannot be dated before or after the period in which they were built, can they? If you're going to build Pi-Ramses, and it's the name that's going to be the new capital of Ramses, it's built by Ramses, okay? It's not like you named it the P. Tutankhamun. That makes no sense. And the Pharaoh who ordered them built, according to Exodus, information, and that's Pharaoh, was Ramses II. because Ramses II built Pi-Ramses. And if, according to Exodus, the people who built the city were the sons of Israel, then it makes sense that they were where Pi-Ramses was being built. That's their job. That's what it says. Ramses II the Great dominated the 19th dynasty of the Egyptian New Kingdom. The New Kingdom. He reigned as pharaoh for 67 years. That's a long, long time, from 1280 to 1213 BCE. He ordered Pithom and Pi-Ramses to be completed by 1240, and this was his new capital in his name. Why? Because the priests south in Luxor and Karnak, in Memphis and in Thebes, had become so powerful that they were challenging the power and the position of the pharaoh. So he hauled the government lock, stock, and barrel up way north, even north of Memphis, and built it on the old city of Tanis. Tanis. And he built Pi-Ramses as his new capital. Historical fact, not conjecture, not a myth. I'm not sure what to do with a question like that. She asked, why didn't they pick another place? Because they picked this one. So if 1240, Pi-Ramses is being built, or is built for Pi-Ramses, and the sons of Israel are building Pi-Ramses, then it's in 1240, isn't it? And guess what? We know where Pi-Ramses is because we also know where Avaris and Tanis were, on the far eastern edge of the delta. The far eastern edge of the delta are the ruins of the cities of Pi-Ramses and Pithom. Quite intact. They're there. Right there. See those red dots? That's where they are. So if Pi-Ramses is there and Pithom is there, where are the sons of Israel? There. They're not somewhere else. They're there. Not because history is saying it, it's because Exodus itself is saying it. I haven't twisted a thing. It's just what it says. If you needed to go east from Pi-Ramses to anywhere, or if you wanted to come in, you'd have to go through that same little strip, 100 miles wide, from the top of the Gulf of Suez to the bottom edge of the Mediterranean, right north of it. You'd have to go through here. It's this thing right there. You have to go through that. If you're going to go east or west, you have to go through that. Look in every Bible you own. Every single one of them. Look up every mention of the Red Sea in every Bible you own. We have a lot of Bibles in our house. Lots and lots. They will all look like this. Check it when you get home. Exodus, 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 Exodus. Wilderness to the Red Sea, drowned in the Red Sea, from the Red Sea, from the Red Sea. Next group. There's lots of them. I'm just doing a few. Numbers, Numbers, Numbers. Deuteronomy. Way of the Red Sea, Way of the Red Sea, Camp by the Red Sea, Way of the Red Sea. These are all separate mentions. Okay? I'm driving a point home if you haven't caught it yet. Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Joshua, Way of the Red Sea, Water of the Red Sea, Water of the Red Sea, had done to the Red Sea. All right? And all of them have that little A, or it might be a B or a C, but they all have those. They all have a little letter like that. And they all go down to the bottom, and it says basically this. Original Hebrew, Yam Suf, English, Reed Sea. Every last one of those, in Hebrew, if it was going to be a responsible translation, doesn't say the Red Sea. Not one of them say the Red Sea. They all say, if you're going to have a translation from the Hebrew, they will say the Reed Sea. Why does it say the Red Sea? Because the first translation from Hebrew into another language was called the Septuagint, from Hebrew into Greek. And they translated this, Yam Suf, into Erutra Talase, Red Sea. To this day, we name it, we call it the Red Sea because of that. That's why it's called that today. It's not red. It's from a mistranslation in around the year 300 BCE from Hebrew to Greek. And every single one of those that say the Red Sea mean the Reed Sea. It's a mistranslation. This is a big problem, isn't it? Did you know that nowhere in your Bible does it say the Red Sea? It always says the Reed Sea. Sorry. But history just stands there. It just sits there. So, this 100-mile passage from the tip of the Gulf of Suez, which is far above the northern rim of the Red Sea. I mean, it's a long way up there. That little thing right there was comprised mostly of low marshy reedlands, Reed Sea, Sea of Reeds. Doesn't mean it's a sea of water. It's a sea of reeds. Reeds grow where? Marshes. Marshes. How deep are marshes? A couple of feet, right? And very muddy. And there's some freshwater lakes, some saltwater lakes. It's a real confluence between. It's messy, but it's not very wide. Remember, the Egyptians called it the Paatfi? That means the reed lakes. And in Yam Suf means Sea of Reeds or Reed Sea. That's what it means, okay? Pathways existed through it, but roads did not. It was a natural barrier to protect the kingdom of Egypt from invaders or people trying to come in, because people were always trying to come in up there. It was the Nile Delta. If you came from a desert, where would you want to go? Go to the Delta. We're going to the Delta. Me and Dawn. It is referred to dozens of times, and I just proved it in the Old Testament, as the Yam Suf, literally the Reed Sea. The Egyptians referred to it as the Patfi, literally reed lakes. Okay? That's where you go through, and to go through there, you got to navigate probably some pathways to get through all this mess. Moses travels eastward via the marshy land between the Gulf of Suez and the Mediterranean Sea. He goes through that. Then he comes back, and then he goes through it again. 3 different routes through this thing. And it's all in Exodus. It's all there. Like I said, he does the route 3 times. And we get all of that. Exodus 15, Moses led the sons of Israel from the Red Sea, with a little A by it, into the wilderness of Shur. Well, wouldn't that make sense that the wilderness of Shur is directly as you get out of the Reed Sea? Okay? In the wilderness, and for 3 days, they found no water. It's pretty bad, right? We saw that aerial view from that. And so if it's from the Reed Sea, then that wilderness of Shur is very, very important. And that should be on the map too, shouldn't it? Because it says that if he left Pi Ramses and he went through the Reed Sea and into the wilderness of Shur, and we saw that too. We've already seen all this. Once through the Reed Sea, one must then cross through this, the wilderness of Shur. And we can see it's bad. And of course there's no water through there. It's awful. It's awful. But it's what you have to go through to get in or out of there. Moses went to Midian, where he sat down by a well, and we don't know which well he sat down in. We don't know. But Exodus has mentioned a name again, hasn't it? Midian. Okay. Bingo, we're into history again, aren't we? And we'll fully address Moses next week. This week, we're just establishing the map. But next week, we're going to start in on this guy, okay? Midian. But we don't know where the well is, right? There's a lot of wells, I assume, in Midian, but probably not standing from that time. On the far eastern edge of the Gulf of Aqaba, this is the second one over, right? Gulf of Suez leads up into the Yam Suf, and up to Pi Ramses. And the one over further on the right, that's the Gulf of Aqaba. You remember from Lawrence of Arabia? That big battle where they came through. Where did they come through? They came through the Sinai. And they caught the Ottomans off guard. And they attacked them at the edge, the far end of the Gulf of Aqaba. That's that other body of water coming up there. Over on the far eastern edge was the small kingdom of Midian. You see it down there? Midian is down there. It's an ancient kingdom. Historical. We know it was there. And there's something else that's really important that's there. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But look at this, what we've got right now. We've got the Nile Delta, now we've got Midian, we've got the wilderness of Shur. And to get to Midian, you got to go through the wilderness of Shur. You see how this lines up so far? And then we have our kingdom of Midian, okay? Remember, it says that Moses went through the Reed Sea, and then he went to Midian where he sat down by a well, but he had to go through the wilderness of Shur. In Midian is a mountain sometimes called Horeb, or even Hor. Hor or Horeb. Sometimes it's called Sinai, but always it's called the mountain or the Mount of God. Always, okay? Exodus 2:13, Moses went to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God, and an angel appeared to him as fire within a bush. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? What did he have to do when he approached that? He had to take off his sandals because this is holy ground. Right. Now, in that, the movie was right. And you know, Charlton Heston insisted that he come down from the mountain barefoot too, and he got his wish. He got his way. He said that that Moses would have been so overwhelmed that he would have forgotten to put on his sandals. That's in the movie. Now, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, Mount of God is all right there in Midian. It's right there. That's where it is. Now, there's another Mount Sinai way further down in the Arabian Peninsula. But this is Horeb, Hor, Sinai, Mount of God. It's right here in Midian. And that's where the Midianites worshipped the God they worshipped. Was there. For 40 years, the sons of Israel wandered in the wilderness, right? Wandering Jews, right? They wandered and wandered and wandered. They wandered for 40 years because God determined that no one, except for Moses, who had escaped Egypt, would get to go into the promised land. He was so mad at this stiff-necked group of people. So we had to have the generation pass and cleansed, and it's a whole new generation, and that's this 40 years, right? You know your Exodus? That's the way it is. It's not hard to do to wander in the wilderness when there's nothing but wilderness, right? Can you imagine just going in circles in the wilderness of Shur? Where are we? I don't know. It looks like where we were 2 days ago. It is. I left my gum wrapper here. Yeah. And yet after 40 years, promised land, flowing with milk and honey. It's Canaan. It's that yellow thing way up there. So that's in this picture too. In all of this geography, we keep seeing this reference, usually half off the map, called Canaan. Well, Canaan, we have always called it, but it's Canaan. Well, what's the big deal about it, right? Why is this important? Well, it's the goal, isn't it? It's the point. It's the land of milk and honey. Flowing with milk and honey. Boy, the diabetic's nightmare, really. Where the sons of Israel are eventually going. That's this whole push, right? For all of this. The process is all going finally there. And we won't get there in this. Moses certainly never does, right? You remember that? Ancient Canaan was a regional area made up of 6 independent kingdoms. 6 kingdoms. Map time. Annie, you love maps, don't you? This is Annie's map. This is the area today. What is the majority of what was ancient Canaan? Look familiar? right? Jordan, Syria, Israel, Egypt. There's even Gaza down there, Gaza Strip. Tyre up north, which used to be the Phoenician states. All right, it's all there. We go back in time, and this is what it looked like. It's ancient Canaan. And it's made up of the Phoenician states, the Philistine states, north and south on the eastern edge, and then it is made up of the 6 kingdoms, and they're mentioned constantly in our Old Testament. All right? Remember when God said, kill them all? Kill everybody who lived in this whole area. Every man, woman, and child, and often even the animals. You remember that God in your Old Testament? That's what he says. Kill them all. Why was Saul knocked down from being the anointed one, the Mashiach? Why was Saul taken down from being the head of everybody and it was given to David? Because Saul didn't kill everybody. He saved a few lives and he was punished for that, for no longer being the top dog. That's why God said, kill them all. And that's these kingdoms: Aram, Damascus, Ammon, Moab, Edom, little tiny Judah, and then Israel in the north. Israel is by far the biggest. By far the biggest. If you remember these names, the Ammonites, kill every Ammonite. And there were no Ammonites living. And 2 lines later, it's so-and-so of the Ammonite, okay? This goes on. They're all dead, and then there's somebody who's alive. How about David married, who did he covet? What was her name, the woman? Bathsheba, right? And she was married to who? Wasn't he a Hittite? Was he a Hittite? These were all people that didn't exist anymore, according to the Bible. The 6 independent kingdoms of Canaan shared a common issue. One common issue: religion. What religion do you suppose they practiced? If you know, don't say it. If you think you know, what did they all share? They shared one religion. They were all Elohists. They were all Elohists. They all worshipped the gods in the El Pantheon. The El Pantheon. They're not even Jews yet. We're so far away from being Jewish, you have no idea how far away we are. So what's a pantheon? What's a pantheon of gods? A pantheon is usually a family of gods with a central male figure as the father of the other lesser gods, with the mother, being his wife, being generally of fertility. Okay? Being of fertility. The Egyptian pantheon, massive, was a complex family headed by Osiris and Isis. Okay? And then we have Horus, and we've got Hathor, and we got Anubis, and we have Baastet, and we have a jillion more. It's a massive pantheon of gods. All right? And in Egypt, they had 2 personalities. It was usually a human body and either a human head or the animal head that represented them. It's very interesting how they did, and beautiful, beautiful artwork. I personally really love it so much that I make a lot of Egyptian stuff. Pantheons are populated by gods with specific tasks associated with them. Well, how do we have that even in our current times? Not unlike the pantheon of Roman Catholic saints, right? St. Joseph with home sales, St. Rita with fertility, and St. Nicholas with brewing. I have a sister-in-law who absolutely attests that every house they have ever sold was because they buried upside down, facing the house, a St. Joseph statue. It doesn't matter if it's made out of plastic or not, and you have to bury it the right way. Now, this is a pantheonic god, isn't it? In this case, this is as old as Catholicism. The saints become the pantheon. No slam. I mean, they were just doing what everybody else did at the time. The Canaanite pantheon was a typical family headed by El Elyon. He's there seated. He looks a little like Barney Fife. all right? And his wife Asherah, the voluptuous Asherah. She is about fertility. And boy, is she about fertility. There are so many statues of her. They are found everywhere. And look at her. Dolly Parton is nothing compared to her. All right? It's just astonishing. And it's amazing because we tend to think of Judah and around Jerusalem as being so Jewish. I'm sorry. These things are dug up everywhere, all the time, in every archaeological setting, especially homes. If you've got to have a little statuette of Asherah in your household. Now, the El pantheon, like any pantheon, you recognize all the gods, but you may have your favorite, okay? So Asherah was a favorite for the family. Well, okay? And another one that was really the number 2 fave was Baal. We call him Baal. Baal, and there were 69 more sons, okay? In this El pantheon, all the offspring were male. And they're called the Elohim. Does that sound familiar, the name Elohim? Isn't that supposed to be another name for Yahweh, for God? Well, it's adopted. It's adopted from this. The Elohim, and what that really means is the Els. The Els. Who lives next door to you? Oh, those are the Els. There's 72 of them. The comings and goings I could tell you about with them. It's a big pantheon of gods. And it dominated the entire region. All 6 kingdoms, they were all connected by this. El, the father of the pantheon, was rather removed and distant. Asherah, the mother, was specifically associated with all forms of fertility, land, animals, human fertility, it's everything. Baal, also very popular, was associated with life-giving water through the weather. He's a weather god. A weather god. The true staff of life isn't wheat, it's water. Water. You have enough water, you can grow your wheat. You can have all the wheat seeds you want, but without water, it doesn't count for much, does it? And a weather god. So Baal was a big favorite in the region, in the whole region, coming from this. The 6 independent kingdoms of Canaan were connected via the El pantheon. They were all Elohists. The 6 kingdoms, Aram, Damascus, Ammon, Moab, Edom, Judah, Israel, one religion, all built around that. The whole region. And they fought like cats and dogs, these kingdoms. Well, I chose the same one for my little pictures. I didn't realize you'd be sitting there judging me. You're always judging me. And then we come to these 2, Judah and Israel. That's what we hear about constantly, right? Judah and Israel. You know, read Isaiah, read Jeremiah, read Ezekiel, especially Ezekiel, going on and on and on about Israel. Well, Israel is the kingdom in the north. Don't look at the map, tell me, what's the capital of Israel? What do you suppose it is? It's Israel. What's the capital of Israel? Sorry, it's Samaria. It's Samaria. Jerusalem is the capital of Judah, way in the south. They're not the same. They're different kingdoms. 2 very, very different kingdoms. Look at the coastline on Israel. Port cities, access to the world, to trade, up and down. And if you're looking on that map of green and yellow and all, it's quite green up in there. You look down, it's appropriately colored. Kingdom of Judah, it's a rotten land. And over there in the Philistine states, just to the left of them, that's all the coastal line, that's all the good land. No wonder they hated the Philistines so much. They were landlocked, and foreigners had the best land. And what were they left with? Bruce, in 10 words, how good is the land up in that area of Judah?
If it isn't irrigated these days, it's horrible.
It's garbage.
Garbage, stones, dead, hard pan.
Yeah, can't grow anything there. So if you lived there and you heard that it was really green, if you went if you went down to the Nile Delta and that you were told nobody's bugging you down there, you can go if you wanted, where would you go? I'm out of here. Going to the Delta, okay? Israel, Judah. These are the two biggest names in our Old Testament, if you didn't know that. The most affluent of the 6 kingdoms, Israel. It's the plum, right? And then there's little Judah. It's the least affluent of everything. It doesn't even become a kingdom until way later than Israel in the north was, historically. Israel ignored Judah, right? Like a little brother that bugged you all the time. Like my brother treated me quite well for as much as I bugged him. And Judah coveted Israel, and they were both Elohists. They're not Jewish yet. They won't be Jewish for centuries, okay? They weren't Jews. None of them were. None of the area were Jewish yet. They're not going to be. Judaism, the worship of a single God, wouldn't appear until the late 8th century BCE. Shocker? Is that a shocker? It's not going to become Jewish yet. Historically, they're not even there yet. Where did these guys come from? Isn't that, Bruce, our question constantly? Where did they even come from? And only by a small group within the kingdom of Judah eventually in the 8th century is when they start to appear. These people, all right? So let's return to the regional picture. We needed to take a look at Canaan and get this whole thing on. Egypt, Nile River, there's the delta. Pi-Ramses. From Pi-Ramses to Midian, where Mount Horeb is a mere 300 miles. Mere 300 miles through the wilderness of Shur. It's bad. That's bad going. But you get to go through the Reed Sea first and slap it up. And to Canaan is 75 to 100 miles, if that. All right? So close and yet so far, right? They're not that far, really. And it all takes place right inside of this box, and even narrower than this box. Take a look at that. That's where Exodus takes place. That's where it takes place. It's nowhere near the Red Sea. It's the Reed Sea, the Sea of Reeds. Egypt, Midian, Canaan, and the wilderness of Shur. That's your geography. Comes up, comes in, comes up, and it's this little strip, 100 miles wide, going. And you got to get to Midian. Why? Because Moses went to Midian and sat down by a well. It says so in Exodus. So we spent the evening with geography. I'm not doing too badly with geography. In that, we've created the set upon which our 2 plays that remain in the next 4 weeks will be staged, okay? The Bible and Egyptian history, regional history, mostly Egyptian history, sharing the same stage, set, and cast, really, right? And the playwrights' scripts are very different. They're really quite different from history to the Bible. They share a large population of former Canaanites, right? The sons of Israel came to Egypt. They were from somewhere else, okay? Former Canaanites living in the Nile Delta. Each group must leave the Delta through the Reed Sea and relocate to Canaan, right? You can't get in or out except for going through the Reed Sea. They share a central figure who is a prince of the royal house of Egypt. Do you know that? Both stories. And their names are almost identical. Almost identical. I call this the tale of 2 stories. 2 stories. The first is found in the Jewish book of Exodus, what we're looking at. Here's our blue, right? About the escape of foreigners from Egypt. The second is found in historical Egyptian history and accounting. Here's our green again. About the expulsion of foreigners from Egypt. Escape and expulsion. Boy, are those different words, aren't they? They're different words. Fireside. Grandpa, tell us a story about when we got our rear ends kicked in Egypt. Doesn't sound like a good story, does it? That's historical. Grandpa, tell us a story of magic and delight of how we left on our own speed, our heads held high out of Egypt. That's another story, isn't it? One is involving an Egyptian prince named Moses, and the other is involving an Egyptian prince named Ahmoses. Historical and biblical. Moses. Ahmoses. Moses, Ahmoses. Biggest, baddest, meanest guy on the block, isn't he? And his name is almost identical. And both men are princes of Egypt. Do you know that about Moses? You think he was Jewish? Where was he found? In the Nile, in the bulrushes, in a basket. By who? Right, a princess of Egypt, of the Pharaoh. And where was he raised? In the royal household as a prince. What do you think Moses thought he was? Do you think he thought he was Jewish? He didn't think he was Jewish. He thought he was Egyptian. He was raised an Egyptian. What did he know? Boy, he had a nice lifestyle living in the royal palace as a prince of Egypt. It's interesting, isn't it? And it's not at all like the movie, where we have a little scene in there, right, Bruce? Where there's a little scene in the movie where his nurse, or the lady who raises him, has a secret red blanket that's got all the Jewish stuff, and she raises him, teaches him secretly that he's Jewish. It's not in Exodus. See, Sabine Mill came up with that. In fact, when Bruce and I were working through this, he said, well, what about that lady with the red blanket? That's Cecil B. DeMille. It's not Exodus. We are greatly affected by this stuff. Next week, we'll begin with the book of Exodus. We'll actually get into Exodus next week. We had to hone this in. I had to show you what we're actually talking about geographically. Don't confuse that, please. Don't confuse that with this. You're going to have to leave the movie at the door, because we're actually going to be dealing with what it says. Like always, I deal with what it says. I don't try to twist things. I just take what it actually says. So any questions? We have a little bit of time. Any questions? Nope, good night came in there as though I'm saying, any questions? No, good night. Any questions? Matt, you always have profound questions. You don't have one tonight. You're short on. Yes, ma'am. P, city of. Yep. P Ramses, city of Ramses. Pithom Pithom. It was a storage city. Okay, like having a bigger closet, right next. Yeah, a walk-in closet next to there. Yeah, because if it's going to be the national capital, you're going to have probably one is for living and the other is for boxes of top secret materials that you've absconded with or something like that. Anyway, please come again next week, please. This is the driest it's going to be, but we had to get our land figured out. So thank you very much. I'm amazed that you all came out in all of this wild weather, because we haven't had winter for a long, long time, have we? Any other questions on tonight? Anybody having any? Whoa! What are we doing tonight? Are you doing that down there? I was watching you. Were you good?
I gotta go get my kid. Yeah.
Get out of here then. Thank you. Come back again next week. Okay. Good. We're there.